Okay, Ukraine, what is going on there? There's some talking, I guess it's still going, the war is still going and Ukraine is still losing people.
Yeah.
And there's some talking about Zelensky is going to replace Zelensky. Is there some validity to it, or is just a talk?
No, I think it is real, but there is also a lot of fog as to exactly what is happening, and it's very difficult for us as outsiders to decipher uh, what is clearly a power struggle which is now underway. So it's been fairly well known that for a long time relations between Zelensky, who is the military chief, the Ukraine's military chief, and Zelensky, who is the president of the country, have not been particularly good. They don't see eye to eye, and apparently there is some, incompatibility of personality. It's also clear that the relationship is now completely broken down. That the two men, from disliking each other, but nonetheless working with each other up to a point, now actively hate each other, and that there's a total rupture in relations. And the thing that has caused this is the failure of Ukraine's offensive. I mean, Ukraine launched this huge offensive over the summer. It got all those weapons from the West, the tanks, the infantry fighting vehicles, the shells, the guns, and all of this. And it was expected that it would be successful. And we now know that they thought it would succeed within 4 months. And it has failed disastrously. They've captured a few deserted villages, and that's all. And the Ukrainian army is now on the defensive. It is losing men and machines at a phenomenal rate. It is losing territory, and the Russians are getting stronger and more powerful by the day, even as Ukraine itself is getting weaker. So inevitably, there is now a blame game going on in Kiev. Who is responsible? Who is to blame for this? And Zelensky gave an interview to The Economist in which he said that it wasn't his fault. He didn't get all the weapons he wanted. Had he got those weapons, things might have turned out otherwise. But we now need to go onto the defense because we're in a long war of attrition, and at the moment we're losing. And he said that. I mean, he didn't say it in quite those terms, but his meaning was quite clear. And Zelensky, by contrast, says, no, 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 we are actually winning. We are still winning. Everybody must go on saying that we're winning, because if we don't say that, the Americans and the Western powers will lose confidence in us, and we won't get all the money and all the equipment and all the aid that we need. And bear in mind, money is important, because it's not just a question of keeping the Ukrainian economy going and the Ukrainian army going, but it's also money is used in the Ukrainian political system to buy friends and political supporters and things of this sort. So there is now this enormous breakdown in relations. Zelensky was furious with Zelensky's interview with The Economist. And we've heard reports confirmed by Ukrainian officials that Zelensky basically wants to sack Zelensky. Zelensky doesn't want to be sacked. We've had one of Zelensky's top aides killed in a bizarre incident where he was
Yeah.
playing with a grenade. I think everybody in Ukraine assumes that was an assassination, by the way, and it was intended as a warning to Zelensky. And it gives you a sense of the kind of political system we're talking about. And there were rumors a couple of days ago that 3 generals were going to be sacked, and then they weren't sacked after a whole day of rumors. And one gets the overall sense that some kind of power struggle is playing out, that the military leaders are furious with the political leaders. The political leaders are furious with the military leaders. Zelensky has sacked the head of the special forces, who would have been the person who, in the event of a coup, would probably have been tasked with arresting him. So he sacked this person, he's put his own loyalists in charge. So there is clearly a political crisis of some kind going on in Kiev. Predicting the outcome is an entirely different thing. And one can't say what the outcome will be. And it's important to stress again that no coup can happen in Kiev without the consent of the United States. Because
Yeah,
if
yeah,
the
that's my
United
question.
States, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
is the United States continue to support Zelensky or not? You know, that's my question. What do you take?
I think the United States is very, very tired and impatient with Zelensky. He came to Washington a few weeks ago. The visit did not go well. I think they found him a very difficult person to work with. I think that what they want him to do is to try to start some kind of negotiations with the Russians because they can see that Ukraine isn't going to win this war. So they want to remove the issue of Ukraine from the political, the domestic political crisis in the United States, the elections that are coming next year. So they want the war frozen. They want President Zelensky entering into discussions with the Russians. President Zelensky absolutely adamantly refuses. He knows that if he did that, his political position in Ukraine would collapse. So they're trying to find some means to remove him. But at the same time, I don't think they want a coup because a coup has the potential to completely upset not just the entire political system within Ukraine itself, but also it will shatter this image of Ukraine as this great democratic country that is fighting against the Russian autocracy, which is this propaganda meme that they've been busy building up. They know that in Europe, this would be a very difficult thing at a time when the Europeans have been talking about Ukraine eventually joining the EU and things of that kind. They also, I suspect, worry that if the military leaders took over in the kind of way that, through a coup, it would, it might easily spiral out of control. There might be violence. Zelensky himself might be the target of that violence, and the Americans would not want that, especially given the way they built up Zelensky himself in the past. So they're looking for an orderly way in which to get him out. And what they want is for presidential elections to take place in Ukraine. They want Zelensky to lose those elections and somebody who the United States prefers to take his place. But of course, Zelensky, for that very same reason, doesn't want to hold those elections. And at the moment, he's able to prevent those elections being held. So the CIA director, William Burns, is apparently now in Kiev, and we'll see what he's able to persuade Zelensky and the others to do. But I think the United States does want Zelensky gone, but I think it wanted an orderly constitutional transition, not the coup.
Yeah. But they should have just, I mean, they negotiated a peace deal, some like 2022, right? They had a deal, but
Yeah.
and now they want a negotiation. Isn't that like one 1.5 year too late? They had a deal, but they just, I mean, they are the one, Johnson was the one who went there to stop it, right? So isn't that lately had been revealed? I mean, we knew that. We know that Johnson was the one who was trying to stop that, right? And he did stop it, even though
He did.
Russia and Ukraine had
He
agreement, right?
he did stop it, and you're absolutely right. There was a deal. I mean, the whole crisis could have been resolved back in April of last year. There was a draft agreement. Both sides initialed it. What we now know, there's been a German report about this, which has gone into the timeline in detail and has spoken to many of the participants. What we now know is that it wasn't just Johnson, that Biden himself sabotaged the deal. That when he found out that the negotiations were going to succeed, he called together a meeting of NATO leaders, basically told them this is unacceptable. We can't agree to a deal with the Russians on this basis. And when Johnson went to Kiev and said to the Ukrainians, you don't negotiate with Putin, you carry on the war until you achieve victory, he was doing that with the authority of the President of the United States behind. So, I mean, the Americans and the British sabotaged the deal. But of course, at that time, they still thought that Ukraine, it seems incredible that they thought this, but they thought Ukraine might win. They believed their own mythology that the Russian army was a hollow, corrupt shell, and it would all collapse. They also believed that the Russian economy would collapse under the sanctions pressure. They were saying to themselves that this is our great opportunity to engineer the fall of President Putin. Biden had just made a speech in Warsaw in which he openly called for the fall of President Putin. So they intentionally sabotaged that peace in the expectation of a Ukrainian victory and of a Russian collapse. And what they've now found is that the opposite has happened, and they're struggling to come up with some kind of way of dealing with this problem. They don't want to negotiate with the Russians themselves. They don't want to open negotiations with the Russians directly, because that would contradict everything they've been saying for the last year about the negotiations must be conducted by Ukraine, and America will just be there on the sidelines, which is absurd after we know what happened in March. So they want the Ukrainians to conduct the negotiations so that the United States can walk away and say, well, we did whatever we could, but the Ukrainians decided in their own interests to come up with this proposal. But they see the situation in Ukraine, and they understand that the Ukrainians are going to have massive problems conducting negotiations, that there's a political crisis there, that President Zelensky does not want to conduct negotiations. So this is already a problem. And they are conscious of the fact that in military terms, the situation is going very, very badly against Ukraine. And in political terms, within the United States, support for funding for Ukraine is collapsing. So, they're caught in a mess that they made for themselves. Jake Sullivan, Biden's national security advisor, has actually now admitted that it's Ukraine that keeps him awake at night.
Yeah.
Not surprising, really.
Yeah.